Good morning, world. If you are joining us for Welcome to Yorkshire's latest webinar, we're about a minute or two away from going live. So we're just waiting for a couple of people to register and log in. It's always, we've learnt the lessons now that if we give it a couple of minutes after 12 o'clock, we'll be all okay. So hopefully you've got a cup of tea or a drink and you sat inside because it's a bit miserable today. But as I say, we'll give it another 60 to 90 seconds. For those that are logged in, we've got the chat function on the right of your screen there. If you've not used a Teams call before, you're not familiar with it, if you hover your finger over the sort of access bar there or toolbar, you'll see the question marks, the two speech bubbles, which says show Q&A. We've got Paul Grace already there with us. Thumbs up, Paul, but you're on mute at the moment, which is fine. He's ready to go. We've got Emma and Chris in the background who are helping us take questions. I think we've got about 50 plus registered people with plenty of questions, so it's going to be a packed hour. And as I say, I'm just going to pull up my notes. So if you don't hear anything or see anything for the next couple of minutes, it's only because we're getting ready and we're just waiting for Sabi, who's joining us as well. So I'll give it another 60 seconds and then we shall go live, everyone. Excellent. So I think we're still waiting for Sabi Sambi, but we've got Paul Grace there. So do you know what? Everyone will kick off, and Emma and Chris, you can let me know as and when Sabi joins us. But because I've known Paul for quite some time now, we can chat the hind legs off a donkey. So we've got no issues there. Good morning, Paul. How are you, by the way?
Very well, James. Yourself?
Yeah, good. How's the weather in your part of West Yorkshire this morning?
It's looking pretty sunny at the minute, which is good, just in time for the weekend, which is slightly unusual. It's normally the other way around.
The sun shines on the righteous. A little bit miserable in Leeds today, a little bit overcast, but we're getting there. So, yeah, welcome to welcome to Yorkshire's latest webinar this morning. And the title of this is How to Capitalise on the Opportunities Coming Out of Lockdown. And of course, with the hospitality industry springing back into life, although hopefully with a measured approach tomorrow, I think it's the right time to talk about opportunities, of which we've seen many over the last three or four months, I suppose is the right thing to say. 3 months really, and we're coming into 4 months. It has been that long. Welcome to Yorkshire have been delivering webinars throughout lockdown to provide a platform for businesses and organisations like many of the viewers today to hear from others in the industry about their experiences of the COVID-19 pandemic and to help form an insight into the future of the tourism industry. So we've got Sabi, who's joining us from Black Solicitors shortly, and we've got Paul, of course, from Red Sky Consulting, who can probably bring us up to date very quickly with his new business venture. Paul was up until very recently a non-executive director at Welcome to Yorkshire, but I'm delighted to say that he's going to stay on in a consultative capacity to help us over these next few weeks and months. So opportunities and challenges. I'd like to think that ingrained in every Yorkshire individual and therefore businesses is an ability to see a challenge and tackle it head on. But many of the challenges that we've faced over the last few weeks and months have been quite unique to some extent. We mentioned that we've run a number of webinars. We've also done some entertaining elements of our output. The World Cup of Yorkshire has been a big success, a social media competition where we've pitted some of the iconic buildings of the county against each other, even restaurants and landscapes. That's been a huge success because what we've tried to do is keep the kettle boiling. You know, imagine now, visit later. We can visit them again now, which is great, but we see that as our purpose at Welcome to Yorkshire. We've launched a new affiliate business membership, which is free for any business in Yorkshire. So if you're an affiliate member joining us for the first time today, excellent. That's fantastic. And of course, our paid members do get plenty more than the affiliate membership in terms of web listings, in terms of additional support and many other advertising opportunities to really help them grow and build their business. So as part of the free business membership, you can sign up for the Yorkshire gift card. So if you're a retailer or an attraction, sign up. It's free. You go to yorkshire.com/gift card and you can sign up and then hopefully take part in all the capital expenditure that's going to happen in the next few months and years. We plan to launch a personal membership over the next few weeks. which isn't necessarily business related, but anyone who owns a business or any person in Yorkshire, around the country, around the world actually, can sign up for that. A range of benefits, including newsletters, prize draws, maybe even something like this little blue or yellow or pink or green Y badge. Hot off the press. There'll be some variety as the years go on, but also the key thing is we're going to look at an ecological approach to Welcome to Yorkshire going forward, and maybe plant a tree. So we're doing some market research at the moment. We've also launched our recovery plan: reopen, rebuild, and recover. So we're not going to carry on with hearing about Welcome to Yorkshire, but that's the first few minutes that you've got to give me. We're going to pass over to Paul Grace, director at Red Sky Consulting, as I mentioned. Paul's biography reads as follows, but he can do this better than me. 24 years in the financial services industry, working for the Yorkshire Bank in a range of roles combining credit underwriting, debt origination, and managing large regional teams. His last role in banking was the figurehead role for Yorkshire Bank in Leeds, working with over 150 staff across the city before joining Red Sky in 2020. In fact, in the last few months, he holds a number of non-executive director roles, as I said, up until recently with Welcome to Yorkshire, because I think the success of Red Sky has meant that time both at home and in the office with Red Sky is where he needs to be. Paul's expertise is in raising finance and structuring banking facilities to aid and assist the businesses' cash flow requirements. Perfect at this time of, I suppose not the year, but at this time of the current economy, with businesses, I suppose, looking at ways to restructure, ways to refinance, raise finance, or maybe look at ways to look at putting some of the current liabilities offer into a structure. So given Paul's previous leadership team roles, he's also skilled in coaching and mentoring. I've benefited from some of that in the recent weeks. Business development, relationship management, and Paul has worked with a number of businesses across Yorkshire and across the country, from corner shops through to PLCs, developing a wide range of skills. So Paul, without further ado, I'm going to pass over to you, but you're a big cricket fan, you're a big football fan, you're married with 2 children, but the football side of it, let's just get this out of the way. Is this going to end now? Who's your team?
Dirty Leeds United, who were potentially just about to blow it for the second year running, but fingers crossed, hopefully they'll pull it out of the bag.
Well, listen, we'll let you off. We need Leeds to go up, and I can't believe I'm saying that, but we do, and we wish them all the best. So when you're not watching Leeds United, you're crunching numbers, Paul. Give us a bit of a background as to you and where you're at with Red Sky, because it's a new company, but what are you providing the sector at this moment in time?
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, James. Very good morning to everybody. Found out first thing today that I've got a twin called Paul Grace who's in banking, because I didn't recognise that introduction. It sounded very good. But I left banking in December sort of 2019, and I'm sort of delighted to join Red Sky. So Red Sky is a sort of corporate finance brokerage business and a debt advisory business which is expanding. So it's been running for about 20 years, but delighted to join it with a colleague, Andy Davidson, as we look to expand the business moving forward. And then this wonderful thing called COVID hit at the same time as joining the business.
Yeah, so to some extent, you're advising people on business startups, business restructuring, finance, but yet you took the plunge just before this. How's it all been? You've gone from a relatively safe position in the banking industry, although I don't think anyone's position in any industry is safe right now, but you've taken the plunge to be a business owner. How's that transition been? Have you got a fixed salary? Are you earning what you earn? How's the first few weeks and months been?
No, I think the first few weeks has been it's been great. It's obviously been a very testing environment. I joined Red Sky at the start of March, so that was just when the sort of banks and the Treasury were launching the C-bills and bounce back loan products. So they probably very much dominated the finance environment over the last 3 or 4 months, and that's probably. It's probably gone a little bit quieter over the last month or so, but then I think at the same time, sort of the C-bill story has moved on a little bit, James, over the last few months, and people probably don't recognise or sort of have a current modern awareness of what the sort of C-bills and government loan schemes look like. So, I'm more than happy just to sort of give you a quick sort of 5-minute update as to sort of how they've evolved over the last 3 or 4 months. I think that sort of might be quite useful for the audience.
Yeah, go for it. So while we're waiting for Sabby from Black Solicitors to join us, it's probably remiss of me not to mention that people can join in throughout the hour. You've got a little question section on the right-hand side, the Q&A section, so it looks like two little speech bubbles. Questions are coming in already. In fact, thank you to Michael Hughes, Dave McCartney from the Alternative Board, Rebecca Hannah from Aon, Joanna Wilkinson from North Brewing Company, James Truman from Leeds Bronze Engineering. So Paul, we've also already got plenty of questions. But okay. Yeah, if you could kick off with where we're at with CBILS, as you mentioned.
Yeah, sure. So CBILS stands for Corona Business Impact Loan Scheme, which was launched at the start of March. And every time I hear CBILS, I think of Fawlty Towers and Basel and Sybil or Benny Hill, because I think that's probably how most banks have been over the last 3 or 4 months. Just in a sort of a bit of organised chaos. But CBILS was launched in March as a way of supporting businesses who'd had sort of working capital issues as a result of COVID. And it's really sort of moved on over the last 3 months. So I guess some of the updates that we've seen come out is that you can, when it was first launched, there was a sort of misconception that you could only have one CBIL loan, and now you can have multiple CBIL loans so long as you don't sort of exceed the state aid guidance within the scheme rules. So SMEs out there can have 4 or 5 CBILS loans, which isn't really well recognised at this moment in time. CBILS loans have now expanded to property developers, so property developers can go into the scheme and effectively have 12 months interest-free money, so they don't pay any interest for those property developments in the first year. It also covers owner-occupiers now, so SMEs who have a factory, a warehouse, a guest house, a hotel, and they have a mortgage on it. You know, they can refinance to some specialist lenders and effectively get that interest and capital back for 12 months. So there's lots of ways that CBILS now designed to sort of support existing customers and existing SMEs and existing business, as opposed to those who have to borrow sort of new money for working capital, which is where it's set out in the first 12 months. It's just around until September this year, so there is a limited time window. I think it's going to get extended, in all honesty. I think it'll get extended like we've seen in sort of the job retention schemes. I think it will get extended. But I think one of the things that I would say to sort of the SME business community out there is use it while it's there. It's there. It's available to you. The banks and other finance providers who are in the CBILS scheme want to provide that funding to you. And you know, if you only sit on it for 12 months and then pay it back because you don't need it, it's not going to cost you anything. It's interest free. There are no arrangement fees. You can give it back in 12 months' time without sort of any early repayment penalties. So why wouldn't you go into the scheme and use it? You know, it's there to support you. It's there to support the economy. Obviously, the UK PLC is underwriting those loans for you. So I would just recommend that everybody take advantage of it.
I was on mute then. So some of the feedback we received in the first webinar that we did during lockdown, and I think you were on it, Paul, but maybe on email only, was, you know, if you're a business owner, whilst appreciating that the CBILS exist, it's a loan, so it needs paying back at some point. But you know, the world isn't perfect. How do you think the government, I suppose, have approached and attacked this? You know, I'm not asking for your political viewpoints or standpoint, but you know, grants have been the big thing that, you know, in terms of furloughing and business interruption loans. Yes, grants for small and medium-sized businesses and large employers. You know, it's not a bottomless pit, is it? So there has to be some sympathy with the government.
No, it's not a bottomless pit, and I think you know, it'd be great if those grants were going out to businesses and you know, they could sort of put them into the cash flow and the working capital. But I think the way the government has approached this is through the loan scheme. I think the loan scheme is very generous. You know, we'll see what happens, whether there'll be an iteration in 3, 6, 12 months time, James, whether anything else comes out further down the line, like the job retention scheme. I think one criticism I potentially would have of the CBILS scheme is that the maximum loan term you can have is 6 years. So, for any SME who wants to borrow, I don't know, let's just make it nice and easy because it's Friday and I'm not so great on maths. But if you borrow 600,000, then that's 100,000 coming out of your cash flow every year for the next 6 years. So in any recovery period which SMEs are ultimately going to have coming out of COVID and any potential sort of downturn or recession, 100,000 is a lot of money to find when business owners are trying to invest that cash into growing the sales, growing the turnover, growing the debtors, growing stock levels, whatever that might be. So, if I was speaking to Rushy tonight, one of the things I'd be saying to him is, why don't you look at extending that term of that loan to 10 or 12 years or whatever that might be, and in that way, that puts less drain on SMEs working capital moving forward. Something I haven't touched on is, the government brought out a scheme where it would take sort of equity in sort of young and emerging companies, which is sort of very niche and very focused to sort of fintech and technological driven companies. That could potentially be another iteration coming down the line. If SMEs can't afford to pay the debt, then could they convert some of that debt into potential equity or some sort of capital, something like that. So, I think the government have reacted pretty well. They got it out quite quickly. I think it took the banks a number of weeks, if not months, to actually understand the scheme, and that caused a bit of confusion to start off with. But I think the banks have adapted. But there are more providers out there than the banks. Ourselves at Red Sky, we're FCA regulated. We're also members of the commercial finance regulatory body, and we work with over sort of 150 lenders. So it's not just a case of working with 5 or 6, and we get to know and understand a business, and then we go to a particular lender who we know is interested in that sector. So for example, some lenders have a real appetite to lend into hotels, guest houses, bed and breakfasts, and other lenders is almost a sort of barred sector for them. They just won't consider it. So I guess part of our job is understanding the market and understanding what deals fit with which particular lenders, if that makes sense, and putting those customers to those lenders where they're going to get a much better deal.
It does. Paul, are you okay if we throw to a couple of questions that have come in already? Some are probably for Sabi, so you may not want to answer, but I'll read you them out anyway. But in case anyone's watching, yes, it was former bank manager Paul Grace saying, I'm not good with numbers or good with maths. That's what you said. That's what you said.
It is, yeah. I
know it was tongue in cheek. So I'll read these 2 out, and you can decide which way around you might want to answer them, and we can wait for Sabi as he's logging in. So Michael Hughes from MJD Hughes Limited would like to hear more about acquisition and the disposal of businesses, I suppose, at this time right now. So is it a good time to buy a business? Is it a good time to wind one up? And then Dave McCartney from the Alternative Board, how far ahead should business leaders consider for their strategic planning? And I suppose when we look at that, we mentioned earlier on, small micro businesses still have to look ahead, don't they? And for the last 3 months, they have been looking ahead. When can I open? How long can I see this out for? Which suppliers do I need to keep on board? And then the bigger employers, and we're going through this at Welcome to Yorkshire now, how far ahead can we look in the event space? And if you're in the theatre business, well, you've got to look quite far ahead. But you go for it, Paul.
Yeah, okay, great. So I'll take them in order. So the acquisition and disposal. I guess as an entrepreneur, a shareholder, a businessman or a businesswoman will look at this opportunity and will potentially see some opportunities. Obviously there may well be some businesses that are struggling at this moment in time, and they may see an opportunity to go and acquire. So I think it's a great time for people to acquire. I guess taking that one step further, if you've got cash at bank and you're lucky to have cash at bank, then you don't have to rely on the banks, and you can go off and do that pretty quick and maybe get a much better deal for you. I think if you are going and talking to the banks and looking to acquire, I think it could be quite an interesting journey. I've been working with one of my customers for the last 3 weeks, and he wants to go off and buy a couple of businesses across West Yorkshire, and it is an extremely strong business, so I would call it an A-rated business. And I've struggled to get any of the high street banks interested in that. And in my banking world, it's not far off a no-brainer. And we've had to go to some specialist lenders for that. And specialist lenders tend to charge a little bit more in terms of interest rate, but those specialist lenders and emerging lenders, have cash, have funds to lend, but they may attract a little bit of a higher interest rate. From a disposal point of view, is now a good time to dispose of your business? I guess it depends on where that business is and where it is in its life cycle. If you're struggling, then it could be a good time if you've sort of had enough and you sort of think's enough and enough's enough. But you might find those savvy entrepreneurs and business owners try and drive that price down drive that price down. So it might not necessarily be a good time to dispose of a business.
It's definitely a buyer's market, isn't it, going forward for the foreseeable future? Do you know of any stats just off the top of your head? This is a curveball to throw in of the rate of business closures or business startups. I haven't seen any, but then I probably don't look at where you look, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I don't have any stats, but I'll confess that I was on a golf course yesterday with an insolvency practitioner, and they're having plenty of conversations with business owners at this moment in time, but they're not busy from an insolvency turnaround perspective. However, they are expecting to get extremely busy into sort of Q3, Q4 of this year. Their general feeling of the market at this moment in time is that as the furloughing unwinds and business owners have to sort of dip their hand in the pocket to support the salary bill and bring their employees off furlough, they're just not going to have that cash or working capital available. And that will trigger, I guess, two things. Redundancies, which we've seen in the hospitality sector yesterday with Cafe Rouge and Bella Italia, and also, them going into sort of some sort of formal insolvency or administration process.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Paul. So the second question, I'll just repeat it to save you having to go back through your memory bank there. Dave McCartney from the Alternative Board. Yeah. How far ahead should, and I suppose could, I'll add that word, business leaders consider for their strategic planning? I suppose at any level as well.
Yeah, so I think our advice would be when you're going to your bank or putting any funding proposal together, think about the next 3 years. Now, that's pretty difficult to do at this moment in time because nobody saw this coming. Nobody knows if a second spike's coming along. But put some sensible projections together using some sensible assumptions around turnover, looking at your fixed costs, looking at your variable costs. Maybe have a best case, a worst case, and a middle case, and put some numbers together. Both, and I think that will get business owners then thinking around, well, okay, we've seen that potential shortfall in the business, or we've seen that potential issue in the business in 6, 12, 18 months time. So we need to look at it and we need to sort of address and take action around that at this moment in time. So I'd say 3 years is a good period. Banks will take a huge amount of comfort in receiving sort of projections, integrated forecasts, which include a profit and loss and balance sheet, which go out 3 years. The one thing I would say is that I think all SMEs should use their professional advisors. So, it's great if SMEs put it together, but I think it's even better if they go to their accountants, because their accountants will challenge them. Their accountants will have some business models that they can sort of put all the numbers in, and it'll churn out some sort of reports for them. So, I'd also sort of recommend that when SMEs are looking at strategic planning, you go off and talk to the bank informally, go off and talk to people like myself, and go off and talk to accountants who have who sort of do this every day for a living.
Yeah. Okay. Couple of questions coming in live, so I've not seen these yet, but again, I'll read them out as they come in. Thanks to Vince Perez, who's joined us this afternoon. Can the panel, and that's just me and you at the moment, Paul, until Sabby joins us. How can I take best steps to position my company in a place where COVID won't completely endanger the intake of money? Good question, and I think we've seen a lot of entrepreneurial steps that businesses have taken over the last few months. I always refer to Little Valley Brewery in Hebden Bridge that prior to lockdown were a supply chain brewer, so they would supply the Co-ops, the Morrisons, the Asdas of this world, but didn't necessarily have an online presence. They now do that, so they sell to the end user, which is great. So Vince is asking, how can you best position yourself to, I suppose, withstand another COVID, another pandemic, and we've seen a lot of lateral thinking and I suppose defence mechanisms being put into place.
Yeah. Well, I guess a couple of things probably spring to mind. Obviously, James, you've just talked about sort of website there, but making sure you've got the ability to receive money electronically. So, have you got a credit card terminal machine? Can your customers pay you by credit card? There's something come into the industry quite recently from a credit card perspective, which is called Pay by Link. So if you use Pay by Link, effectively you send your customer an email. They click onto that link that's within the email, and they enter their credit card details, and the funds are in your account the next couple of days. And that certainly defeats the old usual excuse of the checks in the post, and the checks in the post, or the check run is in a week or two's time, and we'll get that money to you. Obviously, most businesses are online now, so there's sort of no excuse that you can't receive payment by backs or same day transfer or anything like that. I guess another thing is to make sure that and this is if it's possible, but if you're receiving money up front, can you receive money up front for products and services? So rather than receive all the money at the end of something, can you get a deposit? Can you receive some of the money up front to cover your time, energy, and labour in supplying that product or service to that end user?
Have you had to do anything particular yourself, Paul? So as we mentioned, you set up your business, joined the business just before lockdown. Have you had to rethink the landscape and how you approach things?
I think from our perspective, our fee structure works on two ways. We put a lot of time in with our clients up front free of charge, and we do that because we value our reputation and integrity. So we won't charge our customers at all until we know we can help them and help them find finance. So we do that. And that's one of our products and services. We then have a sort of a one-off upfront payment that effectively covers our time and labour to sort of process that loan application. However, one of the things that we're doing under Siebel's loans applications is we're waiving those fees. So we're not charging those fees because people and businesses who are looking for working capital and cash flow to support them at this time, it sort of feels a little bit wrong to be charging them from our perspective. So we've waived our fees in that respect. And then our sort of third fee is, we only receive a fee once the client's got their money in their bank account, so to speak. And in the majority of cases, that sort of fee comes from the finance provider. So in a lot of scenarios, we can actually do our job for very little cost from an SME point of view, because the sort of lender provides us with our sort of revenue. I think the one thing which I'm spending a bit of time on at the minute, just thinking about, is where the finance market is going to be moving forward and what it's going to look like. Obviously, Siebel's is around until September. Not quite sure whether it'll be extended or not, but what happens after that sort of falls away, and what does the future finance industry look like? If you look at SMEs in the current space, they've obviously been closed for sort of 3 or 4 months. So, obviously they've been paying costs, but not driving any revenue through the business. So, I think profitability for SMEs is going to be challenged this year. So, the majority of banks lend on profits. So, if companies aren't making profits this year, how are banks going to assess lending proposals in 2021 when they haven't got those profits to rely on and to show that they can afford that new loan or that new piece of equipment or the new asset that's going into the factory? So I guess we've been thinking a little bit about how and where the finance and the debt market is going to move over the next 12-18 months, probably similarly how it sort of reacted sort of 10-12 years ago in the financial crisis, when obviously the banks went through a bit, well, I was just about to say a bit of restructuring, quite major restructuring in 2008. I'm not so sure liquidity is such an issue now in banking, but risk appetite might be. And I guess again, I think that's where the alternative finance market will start coming through and sort of growing their percentage of the lending sector.
Yeah, just going back a couple of points you made about how you're approaching new business and how you're adapting. I was speaking with a PR firm the other day that have said they've gone back to the old no win, no fee approach. So, PR firms and many professional services would expect a retainer for their services. But now, in the absence of businesses being able to commit for longer term, it's okay, a PR firm responsible for getting Red Sky or another business in the press. It used to be, right, pay us X £1,000 a month and we'll look out for opportunities for you. And if we fail, that's the market, that's how it worked. But now it might be, okay, once we see our name in lights in print, or we've got that position on a news channel or as a contributor, then we'll pay you. And Rebecca Hanna from Aon has asked, any tips to share with regards to approaching new business? So we're all going back out into the marketplace to try and attract business. Today's seminar is particularly about the professional services, banking, finance, and the legal profession. It's going to be competitive, isn't it? So you need that competitive advantage no matter what you do. Yeah,
no, it is. And I'm a great believer in that activity drives results, and it has to be the right activity and sort of and channeled activity. But 4 or 5 months ago, as a bit of technophobe, I'd never heard of Zoom or using webinar on Teams. And something that we've done is we're talking to professionals all the time, whether it's on the old telephone or whether we're doing sort of team-to-team catch-ups with them on Zoom or Teams, and we're just talking to them about what we're seeing, and that regular contact and regular dialogue I think is invaluable. Again, I'm not a great believer in sort of in mail shots or sending emails out, but we sent a bit of a Red Sky update out a couple of days ago, just in terms of sort of the Sybil's market, and do you know this has happened, and do you know that's happened, and do you know this has happened, and that's potentially created some opportunities. So I think even though people are in lockdown, use those tools to use those tools to your best advantage to keep talking to people, because by talking to people, you understand what's going on in their world, you understand their opportunities. And I think the other one is, is social media. So, I've sort of looked on, Twitter, LinkedIn, understanding, what people's problems are or what people's issues are, and actually coming up and being proactive and trying to solve those things.
Yeah, fair point, actually, because there's always a danger of over communicating to your, I suppose, your members, your customers, or the wider public if you're trying to, create business or chase and speculate. But as you quite rightly said, in a period of lockdown, when we're at home and we can't meet at networking events or meet in person, people have a lot more dwell time. So they are using, social media stats are through the roof. web statistics, especially at Yorkshire.com, you'd expect me to say that, are through the roof, because we're directing people to news, we're directing people to trends. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But also listening is key, and social media isn't just a one-way process. Has to be asking questions and reading, but also listening. So in your interest, if you're watching a webinar or seeing the thread of comments, for me, and I suppose this is a tip coming from me, would be, listen and just sense check what's going on, sense what the market's saying, sense what the generic problems are. There's always going to be a couple of anomalies out there that you think, okay, that's random. But there's often trends, and we saw that. So we saw at the start of this, business owners, especially small business owners in the bed and breakfast sphere, the grants that were given out by the government, the £10,000 grants, were really useful. Yeah. But actually, if you were a residential business and it was your home and livelihood, you didn't benefit because you were paying council tax. And it took weeks, if not months, for us to try and penetrate central government for them to understand that. And that came from, me reading a piece in the Yorkshire Post, but a number of people sending emails in, tweets, etc. And you go, okay, we've this is an opportunity for us. Okay, not for us to profit, but in your business, okay, right. What are the same problems people keep having? And I think that's why, pubs have turned into takeaways, because they've gone, right, people can't come in, but we can get around the loophole here of being able to serve food. So going back to the question here, it's how can we approach, I suppose, new business, new customers in this new post-COVID world. Are you thinking much about safety and face masks? If you've got a meeting next week with someone, and it could be in a pub now, couldn't it, or a cafe, how are you approaching it if it's the first time you've not met them? That's an on-the-spot one for you, Paul.
Yeah, I don't know whether you want my honest answer or the politically correct answer. So I guess my wife comes in behind me. Right. Always the best interruptions, isn't it? Right.
As long as it's not your kids, like that doctor the other day, which has gone viral. It was brilliant.
I know. Well, I'm sure we've got 20 minutes to go, so I'm sure my 7-year-old will make an appearance at some point. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, because I now have I've started to come out of lockdown a little bit. So I guess over the last sort of week or two, I've decided that I need to start getting back into my business community. So I've been sort of arranging face-to-face meetups. So I've the diary is now filling up in July with sort of face-to-face meetups, but they will be done, they'll be done correctly, with social distancing and things like that. But things, some of the other things which I've been sort of saying to people is, let's just see how it goes. Let's put it in the diary, let's put it in provisionally. Whilst Zoom and Teams is great and I can endorse it all day long, there isn't anything to replace human interaction and the ability to meet somebody face to face. So yeah, the meetings are starting to go back in the diary, starting to get back out again. Again, I'll be honest with you, and you know me well, excuse me, but if they can be done at sort of 3 or 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and there's the ability to maybe do them at restaurant, bar and grill and in the sunshine, then personally I feel more comfortable with that than potentially in a coffee shop or whatever it might be. So I think it goes down to each sort of individual preference. One of the deals we've done in the last couple of months has been for a chiropractor, and I'm presently going to them and having some treatment for my back. So in that scenario, it is face mask, and you are sort of taking those precautions. So I think it does come down to sort of individual preferences. I'm still talking to people in Leeds city centre, which is a very professionally dominated city centre, and I can see you're in the office today, James. So it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on this. But people are still telling me that Leeds is very, very quiet. There's not a lot of people in Leeds now. Whether that will change or not next week with the sort of restaurants, bars, and other places open, it'll be an interesting one to see. I still don't think there's a huge appetite out there to go for what I'd call maybe the old business lunch or what it might be. So, it'd be interesting to see how the next few weeks evolve. But certainly, I'm now starting to go and see prospects and customers, face to face, and starting to come out of lockdown.
Yeah, so I drove in this morning, obviously for the webinars. Never missed an opportunity for a bit of branding. So, Paul, that will be my advice. Make sure you get your Red Sky pop-ups.
Fair point.
And actually, I've got one this afternoon. We've got a webinar this afternoon about the hospitality industry. And Paul Reeves at Sheffield United said, James, do you want me in my Sheffield United club tie? And do you want the background? And I said, well, Paul, it's an opportunity to sell, isn't it? And you're a salesman. He went, right, well, I'll do it. So we're all now thinking, right, the world's changed. If I've got to keep doing this, how can I make sure that there's a bit of branding in the background? I'm always on message, an opportunity to, pitch and say what we do. But so Leeds is quiet. Really, really quiet still. As you say, it's a professional services city. I think tomorrow might be busy with the shops and the pubs. I really do. And I think choosing the 4th of July and a Saturday as the first day to open pubs, in my experiences, this could have the potential for danger, because not for any malicious reasons, but people don't yet know how they're going to approach it, how they're going to feel. And you mentioned business lunches. The corporate service world relies on networking, and whether it's coffees or a liquid lunch or a business lunch, often impromptuity, if that's a word, but impromptuousness, that's probably the right way to put it, would be, Paul, I've got a need, can we meet quickly? Well, if we've got to now start ringing round and booking in, because restaurants that previously had a capacity of 100 to 50, it's going to take a bit of time to get back into this, isn't it? It's going to be touchy-feely, and you don't want to offend someone. You might, if you said, James, can we meet in the restaurant, bar and grill? The answer's yes, and we'll maintain distance. But there may be others that go, well, actually, Paul, I'm a bit surprised you've said that. So I think we all just need to, cool our jets a little bit and go, listen, this is going to be tough for the next few weeks and months. A spike in Bradford or Leicester or potentially Leeds could mean that we all go back to square one again, which is going to be a really difficult position for any of us. So I do think there's got to be an onus on everyone to, almost like a contract to compete. We want to be up for this. We want to get back to the old rules of engagement. Let's have it out and go for it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree, and I think it is a difficult one, and it takes two to tango, doesn't it? So if somebody isn't comfortable meeting face to face, then I think that just needs to be flagged, and there's plenty of opportunities to do it via this medium.
Okay, so we'll go back to a couple of questions, and this is taking us back a couple of conversations, but it's perfectly pertinent. So okay. Joanna Wilkinson from North Brewing Company, thanks for joining us this morning, Joanna. Could you give us, Paul, an update on lenders' appetite? I think you've done this to a point with one of your anecdotes, and risk assessment coming out of COVID-19. So you can probably speak from the bank manager that was, and then put yourself back into that position now. What are you looking for if someone comes in and goes, listen, I'm looking at setting up a new business, I want a 10 grand loan, or I'm looking at an acquisition? How will things be different now compared to how they were?
Okay, so I think if I go back to sort of CBILS and how banks have been looking at that, there's a defined sort of criteria and eligibility test which SMEs have had to go through, and that's been an incredibly frustrating process for the SMEs, people like myself and the banks to some extent, because they haven't had a lot of guidance and it's been left to everybody's own interpretation. I think another frustration that I have had is once the banks and the funders have gone into the CBILS scheme, they've all had their own different credit policies. So without getting too technical, some banks have looked for the ability for SMEs to cover the capital and interest repayments by 1.1 times, which is really good. And other banks have insisted that, they show 2 times capital and interest debt servicing cover, which is a really tough metric to hit. And surprise, surprise, that bank has done less CBILS lending than the one that did 1.1 times. So, as an SME owner, I can have huge sympathy with trying to understand where their particular bank has been in assessing their sort of their loan application. I think moving forward into New World. And I don't like saying this, but this is probably one of the advantages of doing it by sort of webinar, and that nobody can hit me. I think the banks are going to want more security. you know, that level of uncertainty has undoubtedly gone up. So, you know, if that cash flow debt servicing uncertainty is higher, the banks are going to want to mitigate that through more additional security. So it's a real dirty word, but, you know, that might involve personal guarantees and or, you know, additional security elsewhere. And I think that's where I guess I would really encourage an SME business owner to think about their business and to look at their balance sheet and to look at the assets on their balance sheet and think, well, how can we maximize working capital from assets? So, you know, again, without wishing to get too technical, it might be moving from a bank overdraft into an invoice finance relationship. Now, banks will tend to lend you more money against your debtor book on invoice finance through than they would on an overdraft basis. So, you know, can you mitigate giving a personal guarantee by having invoice finance rather than overdraft? And I think, you know, there's all those sorts of conversations that, you know, SMEs need to have with their bank or you know, a commercial finance broker moving forward. But I do think that banks will want additional security moving forward than maybe where they've been in the last 2 or 3 years, because, you know, undoubtedly the level of bad debts that they're going to suffer is probably going to go up as a result of COVID.
Okay, thank you, Paul. A couple more questions still to come in, and I think in a few minutes we do have a guest. It's not going to be Sabby, it's going to be Welcome to Yorkshire's Head of Commercial, Chris Powell, coming in with a couple of his thoughts on how we can approach the next few weeks and months as well, because we're well known for our networking, aren't we, and our events, and we'll continue to do that to try and bring the business community together, but there's a couple of ways we can do that. So a couple more questions still to give you. So James Truman from Leeds Bronze Engineering Limited. So it's great to have a real cross section of the community. Post lockdown opportunities, what I might have missed or not prioritised restructuring. So bear with me a second. So James Truman from Leeds Bronze Engineering Limited. I'm trying to understand the question. Post lockdown opportunities, what I might have missed or not prioritised restructuring. I'm really trying to understand the question here. Okay, anything that James may have missed that the government have done in terms of restructuring possibilities? Do you want to just bring us up with furlough? I mean, we may all know it, but furloughing is about to change, isn't it, Paul? And you know that word better than anyone. So,
yeah, thanks for putting me on the spot about furlough. Yeah, so I guess furlough is starting to unwind a little bit now, so I think the percentage that the government will pay is reducing over the next few months. So people, SME business owners will have to I guess contribute more cash towards their wage bill. I think over the last week or two as well, it's your ability to almost part-time furlough people. So people who are on furlough, pardon me, can come back to the workplace. So I think, you know, furlough is evolving all the time. As you might be able to tell, because I am bluffing my way through furlough, I'm not an expert on it. My recommendation to anybody on the call who wants to know more about furlough is just to pick up a phone to their accountants, because their accountants have been processing the furlough requests for the last 3 or 4 months. I guess in terms of the question on from James on restructuring, I guess without knowing the full context of it, you know, I guess in my world, from a cash flow perspective, you know, if you've had that loan that's repayable over 5 years, can you go and talk to your bank about maybe doing it over 10 years, which halves the amount of your loan repayments, which puts additional working capital back into your business. You know, there's that Siebel's provider who I mentioned earlier on, who will refinance your factory mortgage or your office mortgage or your hotel mortgage, whatever that might be. You know, effectively that's going to give you 12 months of capital and interest repayments back into your cash flow rather than paying your loan down with your sort of finance provider. So, you know, I think there's those opportunities. I think there's also opportunities to go out and talk to the people who you owe money to. So, you know, they'll be in the same position. They'll probably be as hungry for cash as you will be to keep your working capital going. But, rather than you paying them £30,000 next week, because that's the payment date on the invoice. Can you pay them 10,000 this month, 10,000 next month, and 10,000 the month after? Without sort of coining the old BT catchphrase. And it's good to talk. And I think the more you talk to businesses, banks, accountants, your customers, your suppliers, and tell them more about your business, the more they're going to understand and the more leeway they're going to give you. But actually, by talking to them, that might create opportunities as well. You might be able to spot that angle where you can do more business with them, and more business together. So, I think there are opportunities there. And, I guess the word sort of restructuring to me also means potentially, my business isn't necessarily viable, and I need to restructure it and start again. And, I'm sure there'll be some of those coming forward over the next few months as well. And I think if you're in that unfortunate circumstance, then it's heading off to an insolvency practitioner and talking to them about the options you've got available, and sort of minimizing your own personal risk.
Yeah, I think John Lennon said that life's what happens when you're busy making other plans, isn't it? And I suppose that's right. Life is at such a fast pace, whether you're in business, whether you're a teacher, hotelier, restaurant owner, NHS worker, you spend most of your life working, and therefore as a business owner, I was a business owner for 15 years and I was never satisfied with my business, even though it was doing well. You always wanted a bit more. You always thought the website could be a bit cleaner or easier to understand. You always looked at your logo and thought, can it be sharper? You looked at your staff and thought, right, okay, are we happy, or can we do better? But you never got a chance to stop and recalibrate. And actually, it was often people on the outside that would say, have you thought about this? And it was the most frustrating thing ever. And you went, yes, I blooming well have thought of it. Just haven't had the time to do it, because I'm fighting that fire there. I'm doing that. We've just got that big contract. You're in it. So COVID has given us all an enforced period of reflection, hasn't it? And recalibration.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even the best of businesses that work particularly well have gone, let's have a real look at this. Even supermarkets have gone, do you know what? We were making loads of money before, and that's fine, and we want to. But our customers are now telling us that actually before it was a bit too busy, or actually I wasn't, happy about how that worked, etc. Yeah. So, and staff may have said the same. How did we ever stop and think about our staff's health and safety with regards to coming into contact with people? We didn't, because no one had really done it. Some progressive people had done it, or other countries. So I think there's definitely a way to recalibrate and reflect, isn't there? So going back to the restructuring, every business has to do it. It might have been necessary. They just didn't have the pressure on them to do it. So now we're going to do it. We've been forced to do it, but it's actually the right thing to do.
Yeah, and I don't think I think businesses in that situation shouldn't be ashamed of that. The circumstances that we're dealing with at this point of time, are unique, and it's never happened before, is it? And, let's hope it never happens again. But, there are circumstances outside of everybody's control. So, and I think, a problem shared is a problem halved. So I think, it's good for businesses to go out and talk about those opportunities.
Yeah, and I think we've got about a couple of minutes left, and we'll finish with a bit of a wrap up, where maybe with me and Chris, as to what Welcome to Yorkshire are going to try and offer our members and our new affiliate members that can sign up for free, of course, over the next few weeks and months. But Paul, something you mentioned there about reflecting, recalibrating. I think it's really important. This is just me speaking as someone who looks after staff as well, is to really try and prepare yourself for another wave or another pandemic. So everyone keeps talking about once in a generation. Okay, fine, but it may happen again. So what would we do? What would we keep now? What would we have done back in February had we have known? The government would probably say, right, okay, stocks of PPE and a plan in place. Once that red button's pressed, what can we do? So what can every business do if in March of next year there's another lockdown scenario that's still in there? So we know that NHS and key workers will continue. We know that restaurants can probably stay open for a while, but in a takeaway only service or delivery. We know that supermarkets, etc., can continue. So I suppose, right, if you were to convince the government that you are safe to work without restrictions or within restrictions, then that has to be the way you've got to plan, isn't it? So plan for this happening again, and therefore you've built some walls up and some defence mechanisms.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I guess there's a great saying in sort of the professional circle that, I work in, is that, it's profit is for vanity and cash is for sanity. And, cash is king. So, make sure you're preserving that cash flow. And, that just goes back to one of those key points that, I'm sure if this happens again in 9-12 months time, you might have a Seaballs version 2. But if there isn't a Seaballs version 2, make sure you use it now. If you go into that scheme in August of this year and you can bank £250,000 and just let it sit in your bank account for 12 months and you're not paying interest on it, and you can give it back to the bank in 12 months time without incurring a penalty, I think that's a contingency, a big safety net, and something that everybody should consider doing. It's there to be used, so I'd urge SMEs to use it.
Yeah, I think that's some really good advice to finish on, actually, Paul. Use the government support that exists. Furloughing, we probably didn't know about it at the start, but it was a sensible measure for any business that had lots and lots of staff that couldn't actually work. So if you're a producer, if you're an engineering firm that you couldn't actually tangibly make anything, it's the right thing to do. And we've all paid our income tax, our corporation tax over the years to allow for this scenario. And one of my favourite phrases throughout all this has been, invest to save. If we, it's much harder to stop, rebuild and start again. It's much easier to keep the cogs whirling to some extent, isn't it? And actually, keeping people in business means that they can pay income tax, they can pay PAYE, they can pay suppliers. Just keep that sort of organism moving, if that makes sense. Paul, great. So we'll finish now then, because we've got a couple of minutes to go. Really appreciate your time. How can people find you? Are you on Twitter? You mentioned LinkedIn and social media. How can people get hold of you?
Yeah, no, I think the simple one is if you just Google Red Sky Corporate Services, that takes you to the website. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter, simple search will bring it up. Fortunately, I've got one of those faces that people remember for all the wrong reasons. You don't forget it very easily. So, or my email address is quite a simple one. It's paul@red-sky.co.uk. So, more than happy to chat to anybody, engage with them, and and try and give them some advice.
Well, that hour has flown by. We should have had Sabi from Black Solicitors with us. He sends huge apologies. Just had a technical failure this morning. Happened to us all, but we'll get him back one of these days. If you have any specific questions for Sabi that were specific with regards to his profession as a solicitor at Blacks, you can email them into us. So Chris Powell can pick those up, and that's cpowell@yorkshire.com, and we'll make sure that they're passed on. So we've got another webinar coming up at 2:30, Emma, is that right? If you want to nod, I think it's 2:30. Yeah, we've got a great lineup for that, actually. We've got Sharon Watson from Northern Contemporary School of Dance. I think I've got that right. We're talking about opportunities again, but also stories of lockdown, what went wrong, what went right, but also particularly with the hospitality industry opening up tomorrow. We're going to be speaking with Paul Reeves at Sheffield United and various other colleagues about how they're preparing for tomorrow. Simon Cotton about how he's got through the last few months. He's been the busiest person on Twitter. But Paul, thanks for joining us. People can watch this again on our website live later on this afternoon. If you go to yorkshire.com/industry, you'll find us there. Join us as a free affiliate member. And thanks for all your time. Good luck, Paul. Have a great day. Bye-bye, everyone.